God, I'm just really excited that that song played. How is everyone doing? I am both nervous and excited. This conference has been really awesome and wonderful, so thank you all. I'm here to give my talk, Navigating Front-End Architecture Like a Neopian. First off, a little bit about myself. I'm Julia. I go by she, her. I work at Mailchimp in the Oakland office in San Francisco, and I'm from Toronto. Shout out to Toronto. Hopefully we win the NBA Finals. I'm pretty hyped for that. I do a lot of community organizing work. I do a lot of mental health activism. I really enjoy sleeping, and as Mary mentioned, I founded an open source project 5 years ago called IfMe, and we're an open source mental health communication app. So before I start this talk, I do want to give a shout out to all of the teens and tweens in the 2000s that grew up hustling on the internet and building websites and designing graphics, especially all of the women out there. I guess by a show of hands, like how many folks were on Neopets, GeoCities, Zanga, LiveJournal, list goes on. Yeah, it's awesome. It's really cool how we're all here today doing awesome things. So this talk, as you can tell from the title, is very much centered around Neopets. Neopets is a virtual pet site. Basically, the premise of the site is you have these virtual pets, you feed them, you buy nice things for them, and you just make them happy. I'm really excited about this slide because it was just really fun making it, and I found this really cool GIF of the spinning Neopio world, which is really cool. How you earn Neopets. Neopoints is the currency for Neopets, and you basically play games, and with these games, you can buy objects. You can buy useful stuff to feed your Neopets, and you can buy useless stuff, kind of like real life. I like to say that Neopets is like capitalism for kids. It basically teaches you a lot about capitalism and what it's like to hustle in the real world. And basically, you play these games, you earn Neopoints, and things aren't easy like the real world. There isn't really a meritocracy, so you can't just play a bunch of games and redeem all your Neopoints at once. You can actually just submit your score 3 times a day per game to earn Neopoints. So you have to be pretty strategic about whether you want to send your score or not. And, like the real world, you can make some questionable decisions and play with chance and luck. There's gambling, so you can gamble with Neopoints, and there's also a stock market, which is really cool. Like I said, capitalism for kids, quite fun. So I was very much active on Neopets as a kid and as a teenager. I don't know if you can actually see this slide, but as you can see, I was really into this band called Evanescence. They're like this 2000s alternative pseudo-gothy metal group I was really into. I was a really angsty kid, kind of still am. I started off playing on Neopets, trying to feed all my Neopets, buy useless stuff and useful stuff, level up in the game, and then I started slowly getting into the community side of Neopets. So like a lot of teenagers and tweens in this era, a lot of us started off on sites like Neopets. And what was really cool about these sites back in the day is that you could actually customize the sites. You could edit the HTML, the CSS. If the sites were fancy, you could do JavaScript. So for me, this evolved into making websites and doing graphic design. So these are some graphics I made. If you were a teenage girl in this era, you're probably really familiar with this. The specific graphic is called a blend, and basically we would get these PSD cutouts of really cool celebrities and musicians we were into, plaster a bunch of cool brushes and grungy fonts, and call it a day. And we would create these graphics, using torrented versions of Photoshop or GIMP if we were afraid of the FBI. But what's really cool about this era is that there was just so much excitement about creating things and so much excitement about sharing things with the world. And along with that is the realization that, I made this, don't steal my stuff. So that is actually legit a screenshot from a site that I had where I was like, these are all of my cool graphics and all of my cool layouts. Don't steal my copyright. So it's really amusing how, even at an early age, we have this idea of ownership and intellectual property. So yeah, it clearly worked out for me. I am now a software engineer. I'm both pretty lucky and privileged to be in this position. And like a lot of developers in this room, when you start off your career as a software engineer, you usually start off as a generalist, basically exploring all aspects of software engineering, front-end, back-end, mobile, web, the list goes on. So very much started off that way. Started off doing full-stack web development, some Android development, worked at a diverse array of companies, doing consulting and agency work, and then also doing product development at more mission-driven companies. So yeah, that evolved into me becoming more of a specialist. I think that's sort of an inevitable career progression. You start off being a generalist, and you realize, oh, I'm not interested in everything. I'm interested in very specific things. So this talk is basically about that. I've come to become an expert in front-end architecture or infrastructure. I feel like the words are very interchangeable. I'll be specifically talking about these experiences and learnings and commonalities and differences between all of them. So yeah, I think one big misconception about front-end architecture is, especially when you're starting out, is just thinking that any type of architecture or infrastructure work is just laying the foundations for the code base and setting up frameworks and all of that jazz. But as probably everyone in this room knows, you constantly have to maintain it. It's like a living organism. Things constantly change. We're constantly changing technologies. Technologies are constantly being deprecated and upgraded. So it's really important to allocate time and resources and teams into growing out your architecture and infrastructure. And on top of that, there's a lot of evangelism that comes with doing this work. So you have to create best practices, you have to uphold them, and you also have to find ways to iterate on them. So I think all of this is analogous to hustling on Neopets and trying to earn Neopoints and survive that kid capitalism world. So I'll be saying and giving a lot of analogies towards that. So yeah, I started off very much doing product development right out of college. I worked at Indiegogo, their crowdfunding website, and I was just on product teams working on a bunch of features. And within several months or so, I started looking for something else to do. And at the time, I was really lucky and privileged to have a really great manager who was really interested in my career development. And when I reached out to him, I was like, hey, Lee, I really want to challenge myself more technically and focus more on engineering rather than just building out features. So because of that conversation and because of his commitment to help me grow as an engineer, I ended up on the performance team at Indiegogo. And I think all of us in this room can relate. We're always working on legacy code bases. So I think legacy is often like a dirty word. People think it's terrible. There was a talk a few moments ago where someone used the word legendary. I thought that was really cool. But yeah, I honestly think the minute you write down code, it's legacy. Nothing is ever not legacy. So when we are doing architecture or infrastructure work, it's really important to keep in mind that we're always working with legacy code bases. And the reason why we change things is because something's wrong with it. So yeah, the performance team was actually a really interesting team to be on. This was the first infrastructure team I was ever on. Being on a product development team, things tend to be more clear on what you're doing. You have a product manager, you have very specific Scrum duties that you have to do. There are OKRs, there's a backlog. The work that you're doing is more measurable. And this was really the first time I was on a team that was really open-ended and more exploratory. So what prompted the creation of the performance team at Indiegogo was actually the performance of the site. So the main feature of Indiegogo is the crowdfunding aspect. And this page is super important. It has all of the information, all of the data on essentially what you're giving money to. So as you can see, there is a lot going on the page. There's a lot of text. There's a lot of images, there's a lot of videos, and the speed in which this page renders makes such a huge difference on whether someone gives money to an awesome campaign. So we started a performance team because we started noticing performance issues, especially in countries where internet connections were low. And not even that, but just even within the US as well. So yeah, going back to Neopets, it's a pretty simple analogy here. The faster your pages load, the more money you get. Neopets, the more you play games, the more capable you play these games, and the more well you play these games, the more Neopoints you get. So yeah, this isn't going to be a talk about performance, but essentially, the Indiegogo stack was Ruby on Rails and AngularJS, the first version of Angular, with TypeScript. And like a lot of web performance teams, you start off collecting metrics before you actually make changes. So in web performance, or any performance, there's kind of two ways to collect data. There's run data, which is real user monitoring data, which is literally based on user-collected data through event tracking. And then there's synthetic monitoring, so using simulators to mimic specific environments, countries, internet connections, browsers, operating systems, the list goes on. And then based on this data, you figure out a budget on how much you want to cut or improve in terms of performance. So yeah, we did a lot of the standard things that you do when you do web performance. We looked at pre-rendering, the HTML and CSS. We also looked into server-side rendering. And specifically, we were caching the JavaScript and the images through a CDN, or a content delivery network. And other fast wins that we had while working on performance was minifying and optimizing the assets for JavaScript, CSS, and images and videos. And how we did the SSR actually was we cached the JavaScript and re-injected the JavaScript into the dynamic parts of the page. And this actually caused some issues because we were using a CDN to cache the JavaScript. Oftentimes, the cache wouldn't refresh on time. So it was really hard to reproduce the bugs because they were only production. And something that we did that was really interesting on this team was we refreshed the cache based on the number of hits that a certain campaign page got. And we basically had an algorithm that figured out the likelihood of when a page would actually change so that the cache would be refreshed. So yeah, that was our main issue doing this performance work. And interestingly enough, while doing this work, I was also spearheading initiatives for accessibility at Indiegogo. And while being on the performance team and working on accessibility, I actually noticed a lot of interesting similarities between the two. From an engineering standpoint, I think when you do write accessible code, specifically HTML and CSS, that generally means that the code is also performant. So you get a lot of really easy gains for performance just by writing really good markup. And when I talk about performance, I mean both perceived performance and measured performance. So perceived is basically what a user experiences. It may not necessarily be quantifiably fast, but that experience of the page doing something, versus measured, which is, I'm literally timing how fast the page is loading. So yeah, from an engineering standpoint, there were a lot of similarities. And I think the main similarity I found, though, between accessibility and performance was actually the process of integrating it into an engineering team and evangelizing that knowledge. So I think on paper, all of us will agree that good performance and accessibility are really important. And I don't think that's a very debatable topic. But I think the biggest challenge that we encounter as engineers is actually integrating that work into our engineering process. And I find accessibility and performance really similar to evangelizing testing or getting your team to do refactoring. What often happens is you do all this work at the end of your product cycle before or after you launch your product or your feature. And you're just kind of scrambling for a couple of days or a week to integrate these features, and you kind of never revisit it again. So I've come to learn that when you are evangelizing accessibility or performance or testing or refactoring, it's really important to include that as part of your product development process or your engineering and design process from the very beginning. And part of that is also sharing knowledge. So when I say knowledge sharing, I don't just mean creating docs for other engineers. I also mean actually teaching people and educating people from an ethical standpoint why these things are important. And because we do want to integrate accessibility and performance throughout the entire life cycle of software development, I think it's also really important to educate product managers, designers, basically any type of stakeholder that we're working with. And if your company is a product company and has support or marketing, it's actually really advantageous to do that. So I ended up doing that at Indiegogo. We created a bunch of workshops and educated the entire company and had specific documentation and workshops and articles for specific parts of the organization. So yeah, we did this performance work. We had a lot of huge performance gains. The page ended up loading really quickly. We basically wrote our own implementation of Next.js. At the time, there weren't a lot of ready-to-go SSR server-side rendering options out there. So it was actually a lot of work doing all of this. And by the time we finished the project, we actually realized, I think this page actually would have loaded faster if we stopped using AngularJS. Which I think a lot of us have probably encountered before. But no biggie. So basically with that realization, we realized, OK, so even though we did improve performance, we still have this huge debt of this old framework, and it's not working properly in terms of supporting our needs when it comes to performance and accessibility. So because of that, our performance team actually became the front-end spikes team. So spikes is a term in extreme programming, and it basically is a term that means you have a hypothesis of an idea or something that you want to try out, and then you time box it and sort of investigate the work and time and resources that you would need to go about exploring this hypothesis. And then at the end of the time box, you decide, can I continue with this or not? So we actually decided to do that for front-end frameworks, which is really rare. This was the first time ever in my career where I got paid to learn and just read a bunch of tutorials and actually delve deep into a technology. So yeah, we were a pretty small team of 5 people led by the amazing Zhenmei Wu. And we decided to spike 4 technologies. We were looking at the newest version of Angular, Elm, React, and Vue. So each of us on the team were kind of like the experts for each of these frameworks. We were given a framework to explore in depth, and then based on that, we would share our findings and make a decision. So I was the React expert. So yeah, typically when you do make decisions about front-end web frameworks, you have to consider all of these things. I'm not going to talk about everything on this list, but when you are on this type of team, you can't just arbitrarily decide, we're going to use React or Vue. You actually have to investigate why you want to use these things. So before we actually started investigating these frameworks, we actually basically came up with a wish list and a rubric of things that we were looking for that we wanted out of a new front-end framework. I'll highlight a few things. For us, internationalization was really important, testing, and state management. So this was a really long list. And we basically spent a lot of time actually building out a rubric of this list and detailing what exactly we were looking for. And I think when you are doing a spike process, you do want to be quote unquote objective. So this is kind of a way to do that. So yeah, the spike process, how did it work? So we had this framework criteria of our massive list of things. And essentially, we wanted to test all of this out, but in a production-ready environment. Because typically, I think in your free time when you're testing out frameworks, you're not really thinking about production ready. You're just like, oh yeah, I want to create a starter app or a Hello World app. But we felt that the only way to actually figure out whether we wanted to use something was to actually test it out in something that mimics our production. So we worked with a designer and a product manager, actually, to make a fake production-ready app that had a lot of the features that Indiegogo has, and also tested for all of these awesome things. So yeah, each week we would choose a theme to investigate. So one example was one week we looked at state management. And we spent that entire week investigating state management deeply in each of our frameworks and trying to build it out in this fake app. And then what we would do at the end of the week was report back to the entire organization and our team on what we found. We talked about the pros and cons. We also had pair programming sessions where we showed each other how to do this. And this was a way of sharing knowledge and sharing insights. And another thing I want to highlight is when you are on an infrastructure team, typically, it kind of feels like you're gatekeeping all the time and you're making decisions in a small group. So it was really important to include the entire engineering organization in this, because at the end of the day, they are using your architecture. So yeah, we had these weekly presentations each week centered around all of these criteria points. And at the end of the entire process, we made a report card. We went through this entire list and basically scored each of the frameworks on their ability to execute all of these things. And then based on that, as objectively as possible, we made a decision on which one was the best for Indiegogo. So actually what ended up happening was that Vue and Elm won. They were actually tied. We actually decided to go with Vue because of developer happiness. We noticed that a lot of the more senior engineers were really excited about Elm. A lot of them hated JavaScript and really loved Elm. And the more junior and mid-level engineers were actually really uncomfortable with having to learn functional programming and learn an entirely new language and paradigm. So even though our spec process aimed to be objective, quote unquote, I think it's really important to acknowledge that bias exists all the time. There is good bias and there is bad bias. So in this specific example of us choosing Vue over Elm, I think this was an example of good bias because at the end of the day, your customers on any infrastructure team are your developers. So you want to do what makes them happy and what makes them feel like they can grow out their careers. So yeah, like I said, personal bias is always there. It's not to be feared, but it's also important to point it out when it does have negative effects. And I think another thing I experienced when I was on this team actually was because each of us were assigned to a specific framework and were sort of representatives of it, I found myself being really competitive because I really wanted React to win. And I felt like each week we'd have these weekly presentations and it kind of felt like American Idol or something. We would go up and perform our songs and get judged by the audience. So I found myself getting really personally invested in React. And I think this kind of speaks to overall the sentiments we have as engineers. We get really attached and personally, we find a lot of personal happiness in the tools, the languages, and all the stuff that we use. One example is, there are always flame wars when people are talking about text editors or Vim or Emacs, and the list goes on. And actually, I remember on my team, the person who was focusing on Elm, his name is Curtis, he really loved Elm. During our weekly presentations, he would actually write haikus about what he had discovered about Elm. So just the level of attachment that we all have to our tooling. And I think it's okay. I think that is personal bias, that is inevitable, but I think it's also important to acknowledge that at the end of the day, when you're on an infrastructure team or on any team as an engineer, you want to make the decision that benefits everybody, not just yourself. So yeah, like I mentioned earlier, was super lucky to be paid to work on this for a bunch of months, to work on just learning React and other frameworks in detail and doing this entire spike process. Oftentimes, a lot of companies and organizations don't have this privilege. Sometimes you have to quickly make a decision just for the sake of getting your products out. And back to Neopets. So sometimes it's really hard to play games all the time and play them well and get Neopoints. So Neopets is nice. There are some social services. You can get free Neopoints from the money tree. There's this thing called Neopets Dailies where you just get free stuff throughout the site. There's a giant omelet where you get one piece of omelet each day. And then there's a jelly version. But this is all created because sometimes we just don't have time to hustle and get Neopoints through games. We just want free stuff. We want easy wins. So this is a prime example. So yeah, actually, this segues into my next experience with my open source project, IFME, where we actually didn't have a spike process when it came to using and choosing a new front-end framework. Actually, we started off with jQuery in our front end, and our app as well is a web app that's Ruby on Rails, so we were just using jQuery in the Rails asset pipeline. And if anyone has ever worked in that before, you know it's not fun and not great. So having an actual front-end framework was actually really advantageous for us. So yeah, we actually now are using React and we're using Flow. And honestly, the reason why we're using it is because at the time, the developers who were contributing to the project really liked React and had experience with it. And being an open source project, you have very limited resources. Developers are very hard to come by, especially for an open source project that is mission driven. So yeah, sometimes you just kind of have to choose what is most convenient for you. And for us, another thing that prompted using a new front-end framework was actually, we also wanted to redesign the site. So this is what the site looked like before. It was using jQuery, a lot of really hacky code, some CoffeeScript. It was kind of a mess. And we used the opportunity to change front-end frameworks to actually redesign the site, which is really cool. So yeah, what was really cool was we ended up using Storybook as a UI sandbox to build out components. And instead of just building out new features and redesigning our pages at once, we used the opportunity for the redesign to work on a component library or a design system. Our redesign was actually done by this amazing developer and designer named Nishiki Liu. He's awesome. If you ever encounter designers in open source, hold them near and dear to you. They're really cool and awesome and rare. But yeah, we used this opportunity to build out a design system, and we wanted to do it right from the start. So we tested all of these components, and then we also made sure they were accessible. But yeah, I think most of us know this, where we're doing all of these changes to migrate to a new front-end framework, but the stuff does not happen overnight. So it's really important to acknowledge that these changes are incremental, and you kind of have to find ways to do this incrementally, and also document the process as you go along. So being an open source project, we've come to be really good at documentation, and I think documentation is even more important in open source because essentially that's the only way you can communicate with people, because everyone is distributed remotely. And for some context, we actually ended up using this really awesome gem called React on Rails, which actually bridges together Rails and React for us and does all the Webpack magic. And there's pros and cons to this. Pros being, it's done out of the box. We don't have to invest too much resources into this. Cons being, there's a lot of magic going on. And so we actually started to see some of the ugliness of that when we were customizing our app, especially for internationalization. And another really special thing about my open source project is that we try really hard to be inclusive to beginners to open source. So this redesign was actually an opportunity to get more people who are newer to open source or new developers to contribute, because we were building out this component library or this design system. So it was really easy to create issues out of, who wants to work on the button component? Who wants to work on the form one, et cetera. So that was also a really great opportunity to include everyone else. Some major issues that we did encounter really had to do with internationalization. So finding ways to bridge IE18N between the server side and the client side. And that's when we discovered the weaknesses of using a pre-made architecture. And being an open source project, just basically we had to make sure we let everyone know this throughout the process. So we had weekly updates on Slack. We had open pair programming sessions for people who were really interested in finding out our migration. And another interesting thing is that my open source project, we have contributors from around the world. So I quickly learned that not everyone speaks English as their first language. So making sure that the documentation that you write is understandable to all sorts of English speakers. And being a Canadian that lives in America, making sure that the slang that I use is understandable or just not there so that people can understand. So yeah, what I find really special about the Neopets era of the internet is that it kind of reminds me a lot of maintaining an open source project. It was such an open community where people were constantly sharing the things that they were working on and providing feedback, and generally it was a really nice experience for people, and including myself. And I think maintaining an open source project in terms of Neopets is really similar to the community forums on Neopets that are called Neoboards. It's essentially a place where you can get help on anything on Neopets. You can talk about anything, and you can share the art and graphics that you're creating. And the next level of community organizing on Neopets is actually a guild. So a guild is essentially like a group of people who have a shared interest in something. And it's literally just a forum that's more closed off, and you can work on fan fiction, you can have discussions about things, you can trade items. It's essentially a community. So for me, no surprise here, I had an Evanescence guild where I just talked about Evanescence all the time and just memorized all their songs and all these useless facts. And for me, it was really awesome because not only did I get to express my love for Evanescence, but this evolved into creating websites and getting into web development. And I think that's a really similar story that a lot of people have encountered in that generation. You're building sites on these like small sites like MySpace or Neopets, et cetera, and then you realize, wait, I want to expand more. I want to build my own website outside of this ecosystem. So I kind of like to call this like a Greenfield process. You're building something from the ground up. And so back in the day, being a tween, like I did not have access to to hosting and domains. So a lot of us use free hosts like AngelFire, Tripod, and FreeWebs. And what's interesting is, when we got older, we were able to afford domains. And back in the day, domains were really expensive. So it was like this huge status symbol to have a domain. So this brings me to my next work experience, where I also worked on a Greenfield project. I worked at Headspace in their San Francisco satellite office, and I was the lead engineer, and I architected their B2B product, Headspace for Work. So yeah, this is a really interesting experience for a number of reasons, but essentially, we had to build an MVP in less than 6 months for this B2B product. And it was also a pilot to use React over Ember. At Headspace, all of the web microservices were using Ember and PHP. So my project was the first time we were using React. So on top of architecting this new product, I also had to evangelize React. So this was a really exciting opportunity for me because I was like, oh my God, I have never been in the situation where I don't have to work on a legacy code base. I get to do the right thing from the start. I get to write tests. I get to make it accessible. I get to write all this documentation. So I was really excited, and kind of like my experience at IFME, I started off building out a design system for all of the components, and the whole shebang, tried to make it accessible, tried to test it properly, worked really closely across different teams to make sure that it could be used throughout the organization. And unlike my other experiences, this was actually my first time architecting a single-page app. When I worked in Rails ecosystems, it was all within a monolith, and we couldn't migrate the app to a single-page app right away. So there's a whole bunch of things that comes with working on a single-page app and working with microservices. So many things. You have to build out your own state management system. You have to think about versioning and releases. You have to think about testing throughout all of this. And you also have to think about evangelizing. So yeah, this was really excited working on a Greenfield project. I felt really excited and overwhelmed with the thought of building something from the ground up. And I quickly realized, wait, I'm still working at a product company. I'm still working with product managers. I'm still working with deadlines. So you can't always make all of the right engineering decisions at once, even if you are working on something from the ground up. So it's really important to strike a balance between doing this and shipping features. And then this brings me to my last experience. So I'm currently now working on the front-end platform team at Mailchimp. And our team is all distributed, and it's led by Daniel Espasset. And basically, we are migrating from Dojo to React. And what I find really special about this team I'm working on right now is that everyone on our team focuses on specific areas of the front-end platform. And we are basically assigned to be experts on different parts. So some folks are working on testing, some on documentation, some on automation, some on performance. And I think this is really awesome because it provides opportunities for leadership and growth. So yeah, what I've been specializing in is the documentation engine, basically finding ways to automate documentation. I think typically people write documentation in wikis, Google Docs, Confluence, and it's really hard to keep up to date with. So I've been exploring ways to automate docs based on inline comments in your code. and making sure this experience is accessible, so being able to access these docs within the code editor and outside of it on a static website. So yeah, just a quick example of how JS docs works. You can basically write Markdown and comments, and my generator will extract these comments and generate docs from it. And yeah, providing two options, viewing the doc on your editor and also viewing it on a website. And yeah, I think, especially working on a front-end platform team, it's really important to consolidate your docs and make it accessible throughout your developer organization. But yeah, what's really interesting about this team was actually this was the first time I was on a team where I was not there from the start. So working on the documentation engine was actually really interesting because I was also learning the history and the context of the decisions that were made before I joined. And I think when you're on any type of infrastructure team, you feel the need to constantly share ideas and be like, hey, I have this awesome idea for this thing, and I did this last thing at my last company, and we should do it here. This was the first job where I learned that sometimes it's OK not to constantly suggest things. It's actually really important to stop and listen and actually take in the information and learn the history of the team. Because at the end of the day, you want your code base to be healthy. So yeah, I've been really fortunate where I started working on infrastructure teams at the beginning of my career, and it really helped accelerate and grow my own career. So I've come to realize it's actually really important to have diversity on your infrastructure teams in terms of engineering levels, but also in terms of folks from underrepresented backgrounds. It's such a huge learning opportunity to have diversity on these teams, because at the end of the day, your customers are all of your developers, and infrastructure teams shouldn't just be managed by senior people, because you do have junior and mid-level engineers on your team. And it's really important to document all of these processes and share knowledge. There's so many ways you can do this: weekly roundtables, newsletters, public Slack channels, and office hours, and also pair programming. Here are some key takeaways. Essentially, overall, it's just really important to share knowledge and to provide opportunities for growth on infrastructure teams, and also include all of your engineers, not just the engineers on that team, because oftentimes these teams can kind of feel like they're gatekeepers. And on top of that, I've actually been working on this right now, but once you do create new coding standards for your new architecture, it's also important to reintegrate that into your interview process and make sure that the new engineers that you're bringing in actually align with the values that you've created. So yeah, Neopets is really cool because there's a lot of knowledge sharing that goes on. There are websites out there where you can get cheats, you can get links to dailies, you can find forums where people are supporting each other. And I think we can learn a lot from these communities. And I like to talk a lot about 2000s teens internet culture. I think it's a really special thing. It's not just my origin story. It's a story that a lot of engineers out there have, especially women engineers. And it's really cool that we're all here kicking ass and doing awesome. I just love that time in the internet. It was so pure, and we just did so many awesome things. Before I end my talk, I do want to make a public service announcement. Neopets will be launching a new mobile app this year, so look out for it. I'm really excited. Anyways, thank you.